The grand ballroom of the Fairmont was a sea of dress blues, polished brass, and the suffocating scent of expensive cologne mixed with floor wax. I adjusted the collar of my suit, a cheap off-the-rack set that felt like sandpaper against my neck compared to the tailored elegance surrounding me. But I didn't care about the suit. I was there for Elena. My sister, Captain Elena Vance, had been deployed for 24 months. 2 years of missed birthdays. 2 years of sketchy satellite calls that cut out just as we were saying, "I love you." And 2 years of me managing her apartment, her taxes, and her aging dog, Buster, who still sat by the door every night at 6 p.m. waiting for a key to turn in the lock. Tonight was her homecoming gala, a celebration for the returning 12th Infantry Division. I had practiced what I would say 1,000 times. I wanted to tell her how proud I was. I wanted to tell her that Buster was okay, even if he walked a bit slower now. Mostly, I just wanted my sister back. I spotted her near a marble pillar, surrounded by a group of junior officers. She looked different. Her posture was a steel rod, her chin tilted at an angle that suggested she was looking down at the world even when she wasn't. The metals on her chest clinked softly as she gestured with a glass of sparkling water. "Elena!" I called out, my voice cracking slightly with an excitement I couldn't suppress. I pushed through a gap in the crowd, a wide, genuine smile breaking across my face. "You're actually here. You look incredible." I reached out to pull her into a hug, the kind of rib-cracking hug we used to share before she left. But as I leaned in, Elena didn't move. She didn't open her arms. Instead, she took a half-step back, a movement so subtle and practiced it was almost invisible to anyone else. But I felt it. It was a physical wall. Her eyes, which used to be full of shared secrets and childhood jokes, met mine. They were as cold and gray as a winter Atlantic. There was no spark of recognition, no relief, no warmth. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was clipped, professional, and entirely devoid of the sisterly cadence I had spent 2 years longing to hear. "Elena, it's me," I whispered, the smile faltering but not yet gone. I thought maybe the noise was too loud, or the stress of the event was getting to her. "It's Leo. I brought the photos of the house you asked for, and I'm in the middle of a briefing with my lieutenants," she interrupted, her gaze shifting past my shoulder as if she were looking for someone more important. She didn't even address me by name. She spoke to me as if I were a persistent solicitor at her front door. "Please, enjoy the refreshments. There is plenty of space in the back of the hall for the civilian guests." One of the lieutenants, a tall man with a buzz cut, looked at me with a mix of pity and confusion. "Captain, is this a friend of yours?" Elena didn't blink. She didn't hesitate. "He is an acquaintance of the family. He's been helping with some administrative matters while I was away." The words felt like a physical blow to the chest. An acquaintance of the family. I had spent my weekends fixing her leaky roof. I had sat in the vet's waiting room for 6 hours when her dog got sick. I had written her a letter every single week, even when she didn't reply for months, just so she would have a piece of home to hold on to. "Administrative matters?" I managed to say, my voice trembling. "Elena, I'm your brother." She adjusted her gloves, the leather snapping against her wrist. "This is a formal military function, and I am currently on duty as a representative of my unit. I would appreciate it if you maintained the appropriate decorum. If you'll excuse us." She turned her back to me. It wasn't a slow turn. It was a tactical pivot. She resumed her conversation with the officers about logistics and troop movements, her laughter sharp and hollow, ringing out at a joke one of them made. I stood there, my hand still half extended in a gesture of affection that no longer had a target. To the room, I was just a civilian in a poorly fitting suit. To the officers, I was a nuisance. And to my sister, the person I had dedicated the last 2 years of my life to supporting, I was invisible. The bright lights of the ballroom suddenly felt blinding. The music was too loud. I backed away, bumping into a waiter and nearly knocking over a tray of drinks. Elena didn't even turn around to see if I was okay. She stayed in her circle of brass and bravado, leaving me to drift toward the shadows at the edge of the room, wondering when the sister I knew had died, and who this stranger was wearing her face. I found a folding chair near the service entrance, far from the center of the room. I sat down, the weight of the silence between us feeling heavier than any ocean. I had come to celebrate a hero's return, but as I watched her move through the room, shaking hands and receiving praise, I realized that for Elena, the mission hadn't ended when she stepped off the plane. She was still fighting, only this time, the enemy she was shutting out was her own blood. The gala continued to swell around me like a rising tide, but I was caught in a stagnant pool at the edge of the room. The initial shock of Elena's dismissal had settled into a dull, throbbing ache in my chest. I stayed, not because I felt welcome, but because I was still waiting for the punchline, the moment she would wink at me, break character, and tell me it was all a joke. But that moment never came. As the hour passed, the civilian section near the buffet became a sanctuary for the ignored. I stood near a tall, circular table, nursing a glass of lukewarm ginger ale. My eyes followed Elena as she navigated the room with the precision of a chess master. She moved from one cluster of high-ranking officers to another, her laughter echoing with a polished, political edge I didn't recognize. Every time she drifted within 10 feet of my position, I felt a spark of hope. I would straighten my tie, take a small step forward, and try to catch her eye. I wasn't looking for a public apology. I just wanted a nod, a small acknowledgement that we shared the same childhood, the same parents, the same history. At one point, the crowd shifted, and we were suddenly face to face as she walked toward the bar. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Elena," I said softly, keeping my voice low so as not to disturb her decorum again. "I have your phone. I got the screen fixed like you asked in your June letter. I can give it to you whenever you're ready to." She didn't stop. She didn't even slow her pace. She simply shifted her path by 2 inches, brushing past me so closely that the stiff wool of her uniform sleeve scraped against my arm. She was talking to a major beside her, nodding intensely at something he was saying about operational efficiency. To her, I wasn't a brother with a fixed phone. I was a pillar, a piece of furniture, an obstacle to be navigated. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was an older woman, perhaps the wife of one of the colonels. She had seen the exchange, or rather, the lack of one. "They get like that sometimes," she whispered, her voice kind but weary. "When they come back, they don't know how to be real people for a while. They only know the rank." "She's been back for 3 days," I replied, my voice thick with a sudden, hot anger. "I picked her up from the airport. She didn't say a word in the car. I thought she was just tired. But this is different. She's looking right through me." The woman gave me a sad smile and moved on, leaving me to my isolation. I decided to try one last time. I saw her standing alone for a brief second near the balcony doors. I walked over, my footsteps heavy. "Is this because of the letters, Elena?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Is it because I told you about how much I was struggling to keep everything together? Did that make me look weak to you? Did it make you ashamed of me?" Elena finally turned. Her face was a mask of cold porcelain. "You are making a scene, Leo. Even if you are standing still, your energy is desperate. It's embarrassing." "Embarrassing," I whispered, the word tasting like bile. "I spent my savings to keep your mortgage paid when the payroll system glitched. I spent my Christmas alone so I could take care of your dog because you didn't trust a kennel. I'm the only person in this room who actually knows who you are when that uniform comes off." "That's exactly the point," she snapped, her voice a sharp, hushed blade. "The person you know doesn't exist here. This is my world. These are my people. You are a reminder of a life that felt like a burden when I was trying to survive. Now please, go find a seat at the back. The program is starting." She walked away, leaving me standing by the balcony doors. I looked out at the city lights, feeling a profound sense of displacement. I had spent 2 years building a bridge for her to come home to, only for her to set fire to it the moment she crossed. I retreated to the very back of the ballroom, sitting in a shadow-drenched chair behind a decorative fern. From here, the medals and the gold braid were just a blur of light. I felt like a ghost haunting my own sister's life. I watched the servers clear the tables, watched the junior officers stand at attention, and felt the crushing weight of being the civilian. I was the brother who had stayed behind. I was the one who had kept the lights on. But in this room of heroes, those things didn't count for medals. I was invisible, tucked away in the corner, waiting for a ceremony to end, so I could go home to an empty house, and a dog that still didn't know his mistress had become a stranger. I put my head in my hands for a moment, wondering if I should just leave. I was halfway out of my chair when the speakers crackled to life. The room went silent. The commander was taking the stage, and the real event was about to begin. I sat back down, one last bit of masochistic loyalty keeping me in the room. I would watch her receive her honors, even if she refused to see me. The atmosphere in the ballroom changed the moment General Harrison stepped onto the podium. The hum of clinking glasses and polished small talk died instantly, replaced by a silence so heavy it felt structural. I remained in my shadow at the back of the room, my chair half hidden by a heavy velvet curtain. From this distance, Elena was just a sliver of blue and gold in the front row, her back perfectly straight, her head held high. She looked like a statue of a hero, carved from ice and iron. General Harrison didn't start with the usual platitudes. He adjusted the microphone, the sound echoing sharply against the gilded ceiling, and looked out over his troops. He was a man who looked like he had been forged in a furnace, weathered, stern, but with eyes that seemed to see through walls. "Tonight is about the 12th Infantry," he began, his voice a deep baritone that commanded every molecule of air in the room. "We celebrate the successful completion of Operation Iron Shield. We celebrate the tactical brilliance of our officers and the unwavering courage of our soldiers. We celebrate the medals that will be pinned to chests tonight." I saw Elena tilt her head back just an inch, the subtle movement of someone preparing to receive their due. I knew that look. It was the same look she had as a kid when she won the regional track meet. It was a look of "I earned this, and no one else helped." "But," the general continued, his tone shifting into something more somber, more reflective, "I have been in this man's army for nearly 40 years, and if there is one thing I have learned, it's that the strength of a sword isn't just in the steel. It's in the forge that tempered it. It's in the foundation that remained unshaken while the storm raged elsewhere." A few officers shifted in their seats. This wasn't the standard "good job, soldiers" speech. Elena remained motionless, a sentinel of professional pride. "We talk a lot about sacrifice in the field," Harrison said, leaning forward over the lectern. "We talk about the heat, the dust, the fear, and the long nights in the trenches. But there is another kind of sacrifice, a quiet, grueling, lonely kind of sacrifice that doesn't come with a uniform or a hazard pay bonus. It's the sacrifice of those who stay behind. The ones who keep the world spinning so that when you finally come home, there is actually a home left to come back to." I felt a strange prickle at the back of my neck. I looked down at my hands. My calloused, civilian hands that had spent the last 24 months fixing Elena's broken pipes, filing her taxes, and writing letters that she had just called embarrassing and desperate. "During the toughest months of the deployment," the general said, his eyes scanning the front rows, "I watched my officers closely. I saw who was cracking under the pressure of the distance, and I saw who was standing tall. I noticed one particular officer, someone whose performance was exemplary, whose focus never wavered, and whose morale remained a beacon for her entire company. I saw Elena's shoulders square. A faint, proud smile touched her lips. She thought he was talking about her grit. She thought he was about to call her name to the stage to praise her individual will. "I asked this officer once," Harrison continued, "how she stayed so sharp when the world was falling apart around us. She told me it was discipline. She told me it was training. She told me she didn't need anything but the mission." The general paused, a long, deliberate silence that made the air feel thin. "But I'm a nosy old man," he said, and a small, dry chuckle rippled through the room. "And I happened to see the mail call every single week for 2 years. Through sandstorms, through communication blackouts, through the darkest days of the winter. A thick envelope always arrived for this officer. Sometimes it was just a letter. Sometimes it was a photo of a dog. Sometimes it was a mundane update about a leaky roof or a grocery list. Elena's body went rigid. The proud tilt of her chin vanished, replaced by a sudden, frantic stillness. I felt my heart stop. He couldn't be talking about. Those letters weren't just paper. Harrison's voice dropped to a whisper that carried to the very back of the hall. They were a lifeline. They were the sound of a brother's voice telling his sister that she wasn't alone, even when she felt like she was on the moon. They were the anchor that kept one of my best captains from drifting away into the darkness of the war. He looked directly toward the front row, his gaze landing on the top of Elena's head. She didn't look up. For the first time that night, the invincible Captain Vance looked small. "We spend a lot of time pinning medals on the people in this room," the general said, his eyes now beginning to wander toward the back of the hall, toward the shadows where the civilians huddled. "But tonight, I want to recognize the person who did the hardest job of all. The person who provided the armor that no factory can manufacture." He raised a hand, his finger extending, cutting through the light and the smoke of the ballroom, pointing straight past the generals, past the colonels, and past my sister. "You," he said, his voice booming like a cannon. "In the back. The young man by the curtain. Stand up." The room turned as one. 500 pairs of eyes, including Elena's wide, horrified, and suddenly vulnerable gaze, swung around to face the invisible brother in the cheap suit. The spotlight didn't exist, but it felt as if a 1,000-watt beam had just incinerated the shadows I had been hiding in. I sat frozen, my fingers gripping the velvet of the curtain. The silence was no longer heavy. It was vacuum-sealed. 500 of the nation's most elite soldiers, men and women covered in scars and merit, were staring at me. A guy whose greatest achievement that week was successfully negotiating a plumbing bill. "I said stand up, son," General Harrison repeated. It wasn't a request. It was an orbital strike. My knees felt like they were made of damp cardboard as I pushed myself upright. The chair scraped against the hardwood floor, a screeching sound that felt loud enough to wake the dead. I stood there, my cheap suit jacket bunching at the shoulders, feeling utterly exposed. At the front of the room, Elena's face had gone from porcelain white to a deep, bruised crimson. Her hands were clenched so tightly at her sides that I could see the tremors from 50 feet away. "Now," the general said, gesturing with a broad, calloused hand, "bring yourself down here. Don't make an old man wait." The walk down that center aisle felt like a mile-long gauntlet. As I moved, the officers parted like the Red Sea. I passed the colonels who had ignored me at the bar. I passed the lieutenants who had looked at me with pity. Every step I took felt like I was reclaiming a piece of the ground Elena had taken from me earlier that night. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes on the general, but I could feel my sister's gaze burning into the side of my head. A mixture of shock, shame, and a dawning, terrifying realization. When I reached the foot of the stage, Harrison leaned over the podium, a ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Come on up, Leo." The fact that he knew my name sent a shockwave through the front row. I climbed the stairs, my heart drumming a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Standing on that stage, looking out at the sea of uniforms, the perspective was dizzying. From here, the medals didn't look like armor. They looked like weight. The general turned away from the microphone for a moment, looking at me with eyes that were surprisingly kind. "You look like you'd rather be facing a court-martial than standing here," he grumbled under his breath. "Something like that, sir," I whispered. He turned back to the audience, his hand landing on my shoulder like a lead weight. "I've spent the last hour hearing about the Vance method of leadership. I've heard people praise Captain Vance for her unshakable focus during the siege at the border. They call her the Iron Captain." He paused, his grip on my shoulder tightening, not to hurt me, but to steady me. "But what the captain didn't know," Harrison continued, his voice echoing through the rafters, "is that I don't just read intelligence reports. I read the mail logs when morale is low. I saw the letters this young man sent. I saw the pictures of a dog named Buster. I saw the hand-drawn maps of a kitchen remodel. And I saw something the rest of you missed." The general looked down at Elena, who was standing at the very edge of the stage, her head bowed now, her cap obscuring her eyes. I saw that every time the captain was at her breaking point, when the weight of command was too much to bear, she would go to her quarters and she would read. She didn't read manuals. She didn't read maps. She read the words of a brother who refused to let her forget she was a human being before she was a soldier. A murmur ran through the room. The Iron Captain myth was evaporating in real time. Leo here didn't just help with administrative matters, Harrison said, throwing Elena's own cold words back into the air with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. He was the logistics officer for her soul. He was the one who fought the war against her loneliness so she could fight the war for us. I looked at Elena. She finally raised her head. The cold, Atlantic gray eyes were gone. In their place were the eyes of the girl I grew up with, frightened, raw, and drowning in regret. She looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time in 2 years the uniform between us felt like it was made of nothing but tissue paper. The general stepped back, leaving me alone at the center of the podium. "The military gives medals for valor in combat," he said to the room. "But tonight, I'm giving a moment of recognition for the valor of the home front. Captain Vance, front and center." Elena moved. It wasn't the tactical pivot from before. It was a slow, hesitant walk. She ascended the stairs, her boots clicking softly, until she was standing 3 feet away from me. The commander looked at her, then at me, and then stepped back into the shadows of the stage. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was a silence that demanded an ending. The stage felt like an island in the middle of a dark, silent ocean. Standing there, under the gaze of 500 silent witnesses, Elena looked less like a decorated officer and more like a statue beginning to crumble. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of the ventilation system and the distant, muffled sound of city traffic outside the ballroom's reinforced glass. Elena stood 3 feet from me. Up close, the Iron Captain mask was a disaster. I could see the slight tremor in her jaw, the way her fingers twitched against the seams of her trousers, and the unmistakable sheen of tears she was fighting with every ounce of her military discipline. She had spent 2 years learning how to stare down an enemy, but she didn't know how to look her own brother in the eye after treating him like a ghost. "Leo," she whispered. It was the first time she had said my name with her real voice. Not the clipped, professional bark of Captain Vance, but the voice of the sister who used to steal my hoodies and help me study for finals. I didn't say anything at first. I let the weight of the general's words hang in the air. The general had stepped so far back into the shadows of the stage that he was almost invisible, leaving the two of us in a circle of light that felt like an interrogation room. "I didn't know the general saw the letters," she said, her voice cracking. She took a tentative step forward, her boots heavy on the wooden stage. "I didn't think anyone was watching. I thought if I showed how much I needed those letters, I'd be weak. I thought I had to be someone else here." "You didn't have to be someone else for me, Elena," I said, my voice finally steady. "I was the one person you didn't have to perform for, and you turned me into an administrative matter." The word hit her like a physical strike. She winced, her eyes dropping to the floor. The officers in the front row, the ones she had been trying so hard to impress, were watching with a kind of solemn intensity. They weren't judging her for being a sister. They were realizing that they, too, had left people behind in the shadows. "I'm sorry," she breathed. The words were small, but in that silent hall, they sounded like thunder. "Leo, I'm so sorry. I got lost. I spent so long pretending the world back home didn't exist just so I could survive the day. I didn't know how to turn it back on. I saw you tonight and I was ashamed of how much I missed you. I was ashamed of how much I needed you." She reached up, her hand trembling, and did something that violated every rule of the Iron Captain persona she had built. She reached for the medals pinned to her chest, the symbols of her status, her rank, and her distance from me. She touched the silver star, then looked back at me. "The general is right," she said, her voice growing stronger, intended now for the room to hear. "I stand here because of my training, but I'm alive because of my brother." She closed the distance between us. The decorum she had demanded earlier was gone. She threw her arms around my neck, burying her face in the shoulder of my cheap suit. The stiff wool of her uniform pressed against me, the metals cold and hard between us, but the hug was warm. It was the rib-cracking, desperate hug of someone who had finally found their way back to shore. I felt her tears soak into my jacket. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her tight, ignoring the hundreds of people watching. In that moment, the ballroom, the general, the gala, and the army disappeared. It was just us. The silence in the room was broken not by a command, but by a slow, rhythmic clapping. It started with the general in the shadows, then the older woman I had spoken to earlier, and then it spread. The junior officers, the colonels, and the veterans all stood. It wasn't the polite applause of a ceremony. It was a roar of recognition. They weren't just applauding for me or for her, but for the bridge that had finally been rebuilt. Elena pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, unconcerned now with her ruined makeup or her professional image. She turned to the crowd, then back to me, and managed a small, genuine smile, the first one I'd seen in years. "Let's go home, Leo," she whispered. "I need to see Buster, and I need you to tell me about that leaky roof." "The roof is fine, Elena." I laughed, my own eyes blurring. "I fixed it 6 months ago." We walked off the stage together. She didn't lead and I didn't follow. We walked side by side. As we passed the bar, the major who had watched her ignore me earlier stepped aside, nodding to me with genuine respect. We didn't stay for the rest of the speeches or the expensive dinner. We walked out through the grand doors of the Fairmont, leaving the brass and the polish behind. As the cool night air hit us, Elena took off her officer's cap and let her hair down, the rigid posture finally melting away. She wasn't a captain anymore. She was just my sister. And for the first time in 2 long years, the house I had been keeping for her finally felt like it was going to be a home again.